Hey, Professor Thornburg and class, this is Lyle Russell, and I'm bringing you my final microcosm project report. Here live with me is my microcosm, and I'm going to hold it up so you can see it here. But if you look right there in the side, there is Science the snail. He is hanging out right there on the side, just doing his snail thing. A few days ago, I actually thought he was dead, but he is still with us and still doing really well inside his little half-gallon world there. And I just wanted to say before I get into the meat of the report that I have thoroughly enjoyed this project a lot more than I thought I was going to. My first thought was, geez, I really didn't need something else to try and take care of. But this was really a lot of fun. This jar has now spent 39 days with me as of today, and I found myself actually enjoying coming home and taking a look at it to see if anything new had changed since the last time. So I really had a good time with this. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share it with you. And in that spirit, I'd also like to take this moment, because I know this will probably be the last time we all get to talk to each other before the class ends. I just want to let you know that I have thoroughly enjoyed all of the interactions that I've had with everybody that I've gotten to talk to through our discussion posts, and share information and read information. I know that it doesn't show it in the statistics, but I would go through and read everybody's posts every week. I didn't click on all of them, but I did go through and read them, and I think this has been a really fun class with a very, very good group of folks. So thank you for that. And following right behind this will be my microcosm report, and so I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. So we'll dig right into the project. This is my microcosm, the home of Science the snail, for the last 39 days, and it was a lot of fun to put this project together. This experiment became what I would call an object lesson. It's something I used to use when I was a scoutmaster, when I was trying to teach a new skill to my scouts. So this was a great object lesson for the overall theory of this particular class, especially in the last week's reading with wetlands and aquatic habitats. I thought that was a really good lead into this. And so, interestingly enough, I was already familiar with the Latimer bottle jar with his plants in it. I had seen a story on that a long time ago, and so this kind of reminded me of that off the start. And I wasn't surprised to see the photo of his 60-plus-year-old jar. And my first thought was, well, geez, maybe I could start one as well. Going with a half gallon instead of the big 10-gallon one that he had. But I was not. I didn't have that much hubris. I didn't think that mine was going to make it. But I was really surprised that in the end, mine ended up not just surviving, but thriving. And I'll go into that a little bit more detail as we get into the report. This was a freshwater environment, and I'll go over the things that I used for this. But I really felt like if you were studying a geographic area over a certain period of time, what I might do on day one is go out and start a microcosm of the area that I'm studying. Because I think that as you study the overall area, the larger real world area, you can probably look at that microcosm and see developments and clues come up faster than they would in the regular environment. I don't know that to be true yet, but that would be a theory I would like to test. So my hypothesis for this experiment was that there would be no heterotrophic life within the jar at all. Where I was collecting from, the water was very cold, so I did not expect to find anything in there other than just the algae and plants that I did. But if there was going to be life present, I didn't think in a half-gallon jar that there would be enough dissolved oxygen in the water to support it. So, and then, like I said, the water temperature, it was near freezing the night before I collected this, so my expectations were very low that anything would be in it, number one, and if it was, that it wouldn't survive very long because the water was just too cold and there wouldn't be enough oxygen. So my collection site was on Woods Reservoir at Arnold Air Force Base. It's just about 20 minutes from my house, and it's right down the way from where I used to work when I worked out there. And I was familiar with this site already because the organization that I worked for in In the Army, they would call it MWR, but in the Air Force, they call it services. We had operations on this wreck beach, and so I knew the site. And there was rumors that when they closed the wreck beach, when I worked out there, it was because that they felt that the water was too polluted for people to be swimming in, which I wasn't sure that I believed that, because I would see people out boating in it. I've kayaked multiple times in this lake. There's people that use this recreationally all the time. So if it was seriously bad, I would think that it would have been a little bit more serious than that. I think it just came down to money. But they closed this wreck beach, but it was always such a nice place. And I think that's why the sand and the substrate that I got for the bottom of my jar was such a granular surface. It wasn't the normal mud silt layer that you would find on a typical lake or riverbed. The area at the top there where I collected it is marked, and then you can see, and I showed it in the video if you remember, and it's linked here in just a moment to where the dam is that does the outlet for this lake into the Elk River, and then the inlet on the far side. So this water does move. It's not just sitting in the lake. It does have an inlet and an outlet, and it is, like I said in the video, it is the water source for the industrial operations on the base, and so it does see a lot of chemical infusion. It does see a lot of engine testing and so on. So there is some legitimacy to the rumors of it being polluted. So again, that also lent to my expectations and my hypothesis to be fairly low. So my materials for this, again, from the video, just a regular glass half-gallon jar with a good sealing lid, a small quart jar because the instructions said to collect your plants separately and then add them after the fact. I had a little measuring cup to be able to dig into the ground and make sure that I got a fairly decent amount of substrate and of water. And then, just from the collection site, roughly about 2 cups of surface water, maybe a little bit more. 1.5 cups of sand from the bottom, right about just below my knee depth, and then the drifting aquatic plants that I could find. And then my methods, obviously, we started this, or at least I started mine on March 10th, and then ending it as of today, which is April 18th. So that's 39 days. And this jar was from the first day I got it. I brought it home, kept it indoors between 68 and 72 in my house all the time. It did get some direct sunlight for about an hour a day, but the rest of the time was just ambient or indirect light. I did not add any artificial light sources when there were cloudy or rainy days, so whatever it was outside is what it was inside. And I think overall it did very well in that circumstance. So again, here's just a link to the collection video if you want to go back and watch that. It is on YouTube at this link right here. And now let's get into the starting of the jar. So I measured it out when I got home, 4.5 centimeters depth of the sediment layer, 7 centimeters depth of the water body, and about a 4 centimeter depth air gap at the top. And I was a little worried that my proportions were off. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So the total volume, when I did all the measurements out, I actually didn't know it was a half-gallon jar till I did the measurements. So I'm pretty proud of my math skills there. So, but in the end, it ended up being right at exactly a half-gallon. So the first thing I noticed within the first couple days is my water clarity. Once the water cleared from that initial collection, it stayed just as clear from that day all the way till it is right now sitting on my desk. So the clarity, the turbidity was fantastic for this collection. The bottom sediment, it changed weekly, but not necessarily in the coarseness or anything like that. But the sediment from the plant life started to collect in places. And there was one time where I was trying to move the jar a little bit over so I could close the blinds, and I bumped it real hard, and it actually shook it some, and I was afraid that was going to do some damage, but it did not. So, but the bottom is what I noticed changed the most throughout this process, and it was just really because of the way that the settlement was coming down out of the plant life. The autotrophic life thrived to the point of dropping roots. I was so excited when I came home that day and saw the aerial roots popping out of the milfoil that I collected. And I started noticing that the duckweed on the surface was dropping a little bit deeper root It's a floating plant, so it never touches the ground. It floats through and collects what it needs out of the water. So I thought that was really neat. Heterotrophic life was present from day one. Science, the snail, revealed himself within the first couple hours of me setting the jar up. So I know he was going to be a lot warmer in my window than he was in that water out there that day. So I had life right off the bat, and so I thought that would be a great way to either prove or disprove my hypothesis by how long my snail survived. Later on, though, and I'll talk about this in a moment, he was not the only one in the jar. So just to do a short walkthrough, here we are on day one. You can see that the water is just a little bit cloudy from things settling and just getting put into the jar and sealed up. Again, my little Trustiana snail, Science, he showed up on day one right at the bottom, and he was constant throughout with one exception, and I'll explain that in just a moment. So the water clarity I mentioned before, this was probably the most shocking to me. I'm a scuba diver, and so visibility is a big deal, obviously, in the scuba diving world. And I never would have thought Woods Reservoir would have good, clear water like this. But you can see in this picture from day 2 to day 38, which was yesterday, that water, once it got clear, was clear throughout. And I was very impressed by that. Again, that was probably the least amount of change. After 2 days, it was clear and it stayed that way. But as I said before, the bottom is what I noticed the most change in throughout the time that I had it. So going back to what I mentioned earlier about the aerial roots, around day 18, I noticed that the milfoil had these little white hairs hanging down from them. And at first I thought it was maybe some kind of whipworm, but it wasn't moving, which was good because whipworms are not a good thing to have. But I started looking at it a little bit closer, and I took some up-close photos and figured out that they were aerial roots that the plant was dropping down. And when I did a little research on milfoil, it said that once it gets into calm water, which obviously it is in the jar, that it will start to send down roots to stabilize itself and form a plant colony. So I was really excited to see that because I knew the plants were getting what they needed to survive. And you can see there about 10 days after I first noticed them, some of them made it to the ground and started to take shape into the ground and pull the plants down to base right at the bottom of the substrate. So I knew my plants were doing well, but this is also around the time that Science disappeared. I couldn't find him in the jar, and I thought that was very strange for such a small space. I should be able to find the snail, but I was not able to. So I'll talk about that more again here in just a second. Between those days when those roots started to show up, I want to say it was around day 26, I finally found Science, and he was laying on the bottom, as you can see in this picture, and he was not moving. There was no, I could usually see his small antenna sticking out from the end of the shell, or see him just moving about trying to find things to nibble on. But he was laying there absolutely still, and he laid there for about 3 days in the exact same spot. So I thought for sure that by this time, this is around week 5-ish, that my dissolved oxygen had finally depleted and Science was dead. And it's funny, when I found him, I was bummed because, Science, here he'd been with me for 5 weeks now, and I was always excited to see what he had been up to when I came home from work, and then to come home and find I thought he was dead. I thought, well, that just proved my hypothesis right there that life did not make it in my jar. However, while I was taking a little video I was going to do a funny eulogy for Science, I noticed something moving in the water. And I looked over to the left. You can see in this picture right here, this is on day 28. Science's shell is sitting there. And I noticed there was movement, and I thought, well, there's no current, so what is that? And so I started looking a little closer, and sure enough, a damselfly larva had hatched and had its little 3 feather-like tail wings sticking out on the back. And here, I'll show you a video here. Let me start this video. So there you can see this little wavering in the background. Really, really surprised me. I didn't know anything else was in there. And then, of course, while I was filming it, You can see there to the right, there was another little snail in a more nautilus type shell. I haven't identified him yet, but there was another snail that popped up in there that was moving around right next to where science was. And I thought, well, wow, how funny is that? I lose my one snail, but here comes this other life. And I already knew this about damselflies, but I was really shocked to see them because they are typically a bioindicator of very clean, good water. Woods Reservoir, again, has a reputation of being a polluted lake. So damselflies would, if the water was bad, they wouldn't be in it. They won't survive. And so I was just really surprised to see this and very happy to see it. I was sad about science, but I was very happy to see this damselfly and this other snail floating around in there. So that really put my hypothesis in a little bit of turmoil. My initial thought that my dissolved oxygen being depleted was definitely incorrect. And then just to prove it, I found another damselfly larva the following day. And then by day 38, Science the snail was back up on the side of the glass, and he is sitting right here listening to me record this as I sit here, and I'm shocked that he is still here. And so my hypothesis within just a short span of about 10 days was false and then true, and now is false again. So in the end, it was determined that my hypothesis that the dissolved oxygen in such a small space would run out quickly. And here on day 39, it has not run out. My jar is supporting aquatic life, not just plants, but also the animals. And I was very excited to see that. So the major takeaways that I had from doing this project was that the autotroph activity was producing a lot more oxygen than I originally thought that it would, and it kept everything in there alive, even things that I didn't even know were in there yet. And there was enough CO2 present in the small ecosystem here that so photosynthesis was happening and respiration was happening, providing the give and take that these organisms needed to survive. And again, that damselfly showing up and then finding another one just a day afterwards told me that the old rumors about Woods Reservoir being a polluted and nearly worthless lake, definitely not true. And again, that colder water I really thought was going to be the clincher that I would not have life. But once the water warmed up inside my house, granted it's a little bit warmer ambient temperature wise too than it was out there, but the water temperature has gone up to match. And once it did, life started popping out. I was so happy to see that. And again, this isn't a project I was really excited about to start with, but the way that it has turned out, I'm glad that my hypothesis was proven false. And I'll tell you a little bit more about this quote here at the bottom, but life found a way, and it found a way in the jar sitting on my shelf in my window. So 3 concepts that I feel like were proven in my project in particular was I think that the water temperature was a critical thing. In our reading, it talked about really low water temperature becoming, it's more dense at different temperatures, at lower temperatures, I should say. Now, my water was obviously not at freezing. It wasn't at 0 degrees Celsius, but when I stepped in that water barefoot, when I was doing my collection, that water was definitely in probably the high 60s, and for water, that is cold. So I'm sure all of the life was semi-dormant in that low of a temperature, but I learned in our text that as water warms up, dissolved oxygen is released from that density. Now, granted, it was speaking more of frozen 0 degree water, where mine was obviously not, but I do think that there's probably some truth to that, even in some higher temperature water, that once it got warm, the animals started to come out. So I feel like that proved my hypothesis false. The duckweed turned out to be a little bit of a surprise. Now, you can't really see it that well in the jar unless you look right down in the top from the surface. But the more research I did on duckweed, I found through the U.S. Forest Service that it's actually being introduced to waters that are agriculturally polluted. extra nitrogen and phosphorus were creating problems, and this duckweed apparently has a very big appetite for methane, phosphorus, and nitrogen, and it helps lower the levels very quickly. So I really wasn't going to put that in there, but in the end, I'm kind of glad that I did, because one of the concerns I had that was given to us when we first started this was, how was your microcosm going to process excess methane and CO2? Honestly, I didn't know. Thought about maybe adding some broken eggshell in there to get some extra decay going a little bit faster. Um, and I honestly, I had no idea. It was a spitball shot in the dark, and by adding that to it, I really feel like that is what helped keep my oxygen levels healthy enough, and my chemical reactions healthy enough to sustain life for as long as it did. And again, I've touched on this already, but the third conclusion I came to is that the local rumors about Woods Reservoir being just a trash lake, I think, are over exaggerated. And I believe that my heterotrophic life that I have in this jar definitely proves that to be an incorrect theory. So, since my hypothesis was, now found to be false 39 days later, I would think that the next experiment you could put this jar to, which I'm not going to, I kind of want to, but I also don't, is to let it go. How long will it take for all that oxygen in there to be depleted? Or did I get lucky and happen to find that just that right balance for life to exist and the system to remain viable, much like the David Latimer jar? I would not even pretend to think that mine would get that far, but I am very impressed by the outcome of this, and how well it came out. So if I was going to do a future experiment like that, I'd probably get a little bit larger container, and I would do a better job of doing my daily temperature readings. I wanted to get something to do the temperature of the water, but we can't open the jar, so that may have been a moot point. But I think being able to check the water temperature might help me with the hypothesis of the dissolved oxygen, to see how long it does take, and does water, as it heats up, even at higher temperatures, release a little bit more oxygen. I'm not sure of that, but that's something I would like to test. I would make a smaller sediment layer, or less dense sediment layer, and I would increase the air gap to where my proportions were a little bit more similar. Again, my jar ended up working out, which I was very happy about, but one of the worries that I had is I didn't leave enough air in the top, and I put too much sand in the bottom for it to become, or for it to remain viable. That quote I mentioned just a minute ago from one of my favorite movies, Jurassic Park, Jeff Goldblum plays a very condescending Dr. Ian Malcolm. And one of the quotes when they're looking at the dinosaur eggs has always kind of stuck with me. And it says, if there's one thing that the history of evolution has taught us, is that life will not be contained. Life breaks free. It expands to new territories, crashes through barriers painfully and maybe even dangerously. But there it is. Life finds a way. And I think that in these microcosm experiments, as shocking as it is, because I didn't think mine would live, life found a way. And I was very excited about that. I know he was talking about dinosaurs, and I'm dealing with snails over here, but I think the concept is similar enough that I think it's a very poignant quote, and something to think about when you're looking at how life, interacts and weaves in and out of each other to become these awesome ecosystems. And so last, here is a short list of references that I used. Obviously, our textbook, a few online articles, the quote from Jurassic Park, and then my own YouTube video. I never really thought I would see myself referenced alongside Steven Spielberg, but there it is. So I really appreciate all your input and your comments, and I look forward to seeing your projects as well, even the ones that may not have turned out so good. And I hope y'all have a great rest of the class, and carry on and do fantastic things in your studies. Thanks.